Good morning, everyone. I'm happy that we are with so many people here in the webinar. The first webinar from the European Society and Eurogentest related to the IVDR regulation. We have people from different disciplines or different lab professionals, also from a lot of countries. Before we start, I would like to mention that if you have a question, that you need to go to the Q&A and not to the chat box. So in the question box, we will try to follow up the questions and collect them and bring them to the session of questions after some presentations. So I will start with an introduction for this meeting. For today, and before I start with the regulation, here you see the pool that you can submit, so that we have an idea who is in the audience, in our virtual audience. So please fill in your function, from which country you are, and there is a third question about how you feel today about the energy level. It would be nice if you can complete it now, then we can start immediately with a better view who is in the room at the moment. So when you're filling in the questionnaire, I will start already with an introduction of myself. I am Els de Kweker. I'm working at the University of Leuven. I'm the head of the quality team of the medical diagnostic in our university hospital, and so also for the genetics department. Recently, I become the regulatory affairs officer for the labs, and I have also a research unit about biomedical quality assurance for more than 20 years, where we also have working together with the Eurogentest project, CF network, and so on in genetics. So we have in the beginning So today I would like to share with you some topics for the introduction. And first I will go to the initiatives we already took with the society and Eurogentest. We have at the moment two regulations which came from a directive. The medical device regulation, which is focused on the patient side, and the IVD regulation, which is focused on the laboratory side, on sample handling and doing the analysis on these samples. Software can be in the medical device regulation and in the IVD regulation, but the regulation, both booklets with the requirements, it's more or less a mirror. So if you understand the IVDR, you understand also the MDR with some minor points that are used specifically in one of the regulations. So it is a European regulation. That means that we need to implement it in each European country as such. That is the main difference with the directive. In the directive, all the countries have freedom what they implement. Now, in each European country, the regulation is the same. And we have in addition also guidance and interpretation documents to understand better the regulation. And in each country, you have a separate implementation law, which will explain you who is the competent authority in your country, who have an eye on the IVDR regulation, and which specific elements are included or not included, where there is some freedom in the regulation. So as you could see, the IVD regulation, it's much bigger than the directive. It gives also more information what is required. And very important, there is now also requirements for hospitals, for health institutions related to the use of in-house IVDs, also called the laboratory developed test. The initiatives that the Society and Eurogentest took so far. So when Eurogentes was accepted as a big European project early 2000, then we have only the directive, and there we have, together with some law people, have detailed view on it, and we were trying to bring the genetic tests all in the same list of classification. Later on, when they start revise the directive and go into a regulation, the European Society prepared already some policy statements to give the importance that genetic testing service and the rare diseases that they need to, that we have quite a lot of innovation that is needed to help the patient and to have a better patient outcome. So in September 2020, when we have when the regulation was already published, the European Society has also a policy statement together with other societies, and we become also a member of the Biomed Alliance, which is an organization which brings different societies together and which have a direct link to the European Parliament and the European Commission. And 2 weeks ago, on the conference of the society, the board decided that they will further support the initiative for helping the labs for implementing the IVDR. So which impact and challenges do we have? The impact is for each group high. For the public and the patients, they will have safer devices, more transparency. So the public and the patients will be very happy. It was also a request from them to have better devices where they can trust that the quality is okay. For the health institutions, there are stricter standards. I mentioned already about the development of in-house tests is included in the regulation. Probably we will be also forced to use commercial IVDs instead of our in-house developed tests. We will come later to this. And the regulation includes also software. And this is quite important for us as genetic testing group, because we have quite a lot of software that is frequently developed or partly developed in-house for bioinformatics, for interpretation of the NGS results. There are also a lot of impact for the manufacturing and the notified bodies, but you can have a view on it, but it's not really the topic of today. But don't forget, they have also a lot of impact, and it's not only the laboratories. If we go to the challenges, then in the change, then you see there are more devices covered in the scope, like predictive genetic test, companion diagnostic software, and this leads to a differentiation that is possible in the classification. It covers also the in-house IVDs, and also an important element for genetics is if a sample of a European patient is tested in US, for instance, the IVD regulation is also there required to be followed. So if we send a sample outside of Europe and it's a sample of a European patient, member of a European country, then we need to be sure that they follow also our regulation in Europe. It's really to protect the inhabitants from Europe. We have a new device classification systems, and the change here is that nearly 80% of our devices need to go to a notified body for certification. Under the directive, it was only 20%. The reason is that they would like to have a better view that what is done to assure the quality, the patient safety, that this is verified by a third party before we have self-declaration and self-certification, and due to non-conformities, they say, so this is not sufficient enough. A challenge is also that the notified bodies have stricter rules, and they need to illustrate that they have really knowledge about specific domains. So we have under the directive more than nearly 100 notified bodies. Now at the moment only 7 notified bodies are recognized for doing work in IVD under the IVD regulation to do certifications, and I didn't check so far how many from these 7 can do genetic testing, because there is also a differentiation. Another challenge is that we are not only looking to a kit is made, no, we look to the whole life cycle approach of the kit. From the design, bring it on the market, use it in the lab, and afterwards, what is the post-market surveillance? What are the non-conformities that were mentioned? And as last point, also, if you use importers, distributors, there are additional requirements, and also the traceability of the device is very important. So these are the challenges. Important to know and to follow the rest of the day is that we have two kinds of IVDs. We have a CE IVD. This is an IVD that has the label already with the CE and mostly obtained by the notified body. And we have an LDT, or an in-house IVD, that is only allowed in a health institution, and we will discuss later the specific requirements when you can use this. So you have two kinds of issues. By a laboratory developed test, mostly you developed it from research use only product, and to develop this, we have additional requirements. It's less than what the manufacturing need to do, but we need to follow it, and if we are not following it, we cannot use it according to the device. The requirements are mentioned in this Article 5, and we will go in the afternoon detail in this Article 5. But I would like to give you an overview. What are the possibilities, the multiple scenarios that we need to follow or should follow? So if you use a CIVD kit in your lab and it stays on the market, you can continue using it. But it's possible that the manufacturer say, yes, we are not in time ready for our new certificate, then we will have in the lab a problem, and we need to implement a laboratory developed test. If we modify the CE IVD kit, we need to verify based on a guidance document that is already available if this modification is significant or not significant. If it is significant, then this device looks like an LDT, and you need to follow one of these three rules. When there is an equivalent the IVD available, you need to switch to that one. When there is one available but not really equivalent, you need to carefully justify the use of your LDT. Sorry, when there is no available, you need to justify when you use it. When you would like to use your LDT further, and there is an equivalent on the market, perhaps you need to go on the market and label it by yourself, and go through the process of a notified body. Classifications. The classification is also changed, and in the beginning, the genetic test belongs to this A and this B, and you have different requirements under the directive. At the moment, all the genetic tests can be classified under C. The classification is based on different rules, which are mentioned in Annex 8 of the IVDR, and we need to follow this, and we need to mention to the competent authority for each in-house IVD that we are using, and we will ask hospital exemptions, that we must tell under, normally it falls under Class C, the genetic test, which rule we need to follow, and then we need to say Rule 3, because it's a prenatal screening, Class C. So for genetic tests, it's quite easy because most of them are all belonging to Class C. If you work in other disciplines like pathology, like clinical chemistry, then you have the possibility they are in Class C or in Class B. Here you see some examples. So our in-house developed tests can be of Class E, B, C, and D. Genetics mostly C, some of Class A, like collection material that we make by ourselves. if we can use the hospital exemption more this afternoon, then the national competent authority, which is mentioned in your national implementation law, which authority that is, need to know which product you're using, which test you're using. For class B, C, and D, they need to go to a notified body. For some examples, like class A, non-sterile, they see it as low risk, they need to go also to the national authority. Sorry. So the timeline. I think everyone was very happy if we heard early this year that there is a delay. But the delay is not really so something that we are not really too happy, because the implementation is started, and as you will see later today, what we need to have now in place for the in-house IVD product is quite a lot. So we have dates for the manufacturing, we have dates for the in-house devices. This is a timeline that I would like to explain you to have a better view and understanding for the timeline for the manufacturing. So the IVD regulations start, and for instance, for Class C products that are have a certificate, self-certification, or a notified body, most of them go via a notified body, which are on the market with a certificate of the directive, can be used further, but it needs to be a new certificate need to be obtained for all Class C products in May 26. So then they need to have a certificate. So they can still manufacture kits from Class C in the new classification with the certificate they obtain under the directive. But in May 26, the manufacturer need to stop manufacturing these kits. They have some period, they can use the kits that they manufacture in April 2026, they can use it till 2027, but they cannot manufacture additional ones with the old certificate. So this is important to know, because we will know in May 26 which products will be available for genetic testing on the market with a certificate for the regulation. For our in-house test, you see here that we have different deadlines. I will go in detail when we discuss 5.5, which deadlines include what. So as conclusion, where do we need to start? Following this webinar is already a good starting point. For those who didn't download the IVDR so far, download it, start reading it, start marking it, go to Article 5.5, Annex 1, and also something more. You will see names, definitions in the IVDR, and you will see, oh, in Annex 1 they mentioned this, and we need to follow also article like this. So there are more information somewhere in the IVDR document. Also make an inventory of your tests, because you need to have a bit better picture. What do we have as in-house? What do we don't have as in-house? Make a classification of your tests, including your software, and check if you use your in-house devices in the same institute. Or do you have worked together with other institutes, and how can you justify this? So this was the first introduction, and I will stop here. And I'm not sure if we have time for questions. Gert Matthijs, my colleague, is looking to the time also. If not, I suggest we go to the next speaker. The next speaker is Olga Tashenko. She's the policy officer at the European Commission. I'm very happy that she was willing to join this webinar. And she has an oversight of the implementation for the European Commission of IVDR.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Olga Tkachenko. I work in the Department for Health and Food Safety in the European Commission in the unit that deals with medical devices, including IVDs. And it is my pleasure to be in this webinar with you today. So Els had already given you a good introduction into the IVDR. What I will focus on in my talk is the role of the European Commission and of the competent authorities in the IVDR. And I would like to do this to cover three aspects of this. First of all, on a bigger scale, what is the role of the Commission and Member States in the EU-level decision-making? So, for example, when a new piece of legislation is to be adopted. Secondly, what is the role of the Commission and Member States in the oversight of how the IVDR is being set up now? And thirdly, if we think about the conformity assessment system for medical devices that is created by the IVDR, what are the routine roles of the Commission and Member States in that? And I'd like to finish with a brief overview of the state of play with the implementation of different elements of the IVDR. So jumping into the first part, with regard to the EU level decision making, you can think about this on two levels. So the first one is here on the left-hand side of the diagram. So when legislative decisions need to be taken, such as to adopt a new EU law, here there are three key institutions: the European Commission, the Parliament, and the Council. In the Council, we have representatives of member state governments. So these are typically ministers. And what happens is that the Commission can propose a new piece of legislation, and then the European Parliament and the Council are the ones that adopt it, approve it. Once a piece of legislation is adopted, sometimes there's further work that is needed to really put the law into practice. And this is the right-hand side of this diagram. So here, when decisions on a technical level need to be made, here the Parliament and the Council are no longer involved. This is mostly the job of the Commission with the support of competent authorities of member states. So typically, these are expert groups consisting of competent authorities, and for the devices, for IVDs, this is the Medical Device Coordination Group, and we will come back to this later. And at all levels of this, both on the legislative side and on the technical side, there is a lot of input from stakeholders at different stages of the process. So if we think about the IVDR, all at the stage of the adoption of the IVDR itself, and also more recently for the adoption of the amending regulation that extended the transitional periods for different devices, these were done this way. And so here the Commission made a proposal, and the European Parliament and the Council, with the member states in it, adopted that legislation. So if we now move on to the second part, the implementation of the IVDR at EU level. Here, the centerpiece of this work is the Medical Device Coordination Group. So here you have a schematic showing how it works. It's a little bit busy, so I will walk you through it. So the members of the Medical Device Coordination Group are competent authorities, as I have mentioned, and it is chaired by the European Commission. And here at the top of the diagram, you can see that there are actually several units involved in this work. From the Commission side, you have the B6 unit, which is the unit where I work. We deal with overall policy and implementation of the legislation. There are also other units supporting us on different elements. We also have some support from the European Medicines Agency now, especially with management of expert panels under the IVDR and the medical device regulation as well. So the EMA is not officially part of the Commission, but it is affiliated to it. Then in green, you can see that there is also the CMD. This is a group of competent authorities for medical devices. It's their name. So this is not chaired by the Commission. It's a forum for member states to exchange on matters of their interest. Commission is usually invited as an observer to that. And finally, you have here this box in yellow, the Regulatory Committee. The members of it are mostly can be the same as in the MDCG, but it is formally a different group. Its purpose is very specific. It's only to vote on implementing legislation that then is adopted by the Commission. At the bottom of the diagram, you can see 13 subgroups of the MDCG. So these are thematic subgroups that deal with those particular topics. You can see also here that there's group number 11 on in vitro diagnostic medical devices. So I'm the chair of this group, together with a representative from the French competent authority. We chair this group together. And it may seem like the IVDs is a very small part of this whole group because it deals with also non-IVD medical devices such as implants. But in fact, a lot of the work is common to both fields, medical devices and IVDs. So those other groups that are not in boxes here, they also do work that is relevant for IVDs. But the IVD working group deals with really IVD specific elements. So to explain a bit more who is in the MDCG, you can find a lot of information in this register of Commission expert groups. The members are the 27 competent authorities from different member states. There are also some observer countries and many stakeholder associations. So overall in the MDCG, there are 34 stakeholder observers and there are 7 IVD-specific stakeholder associations. So these also participate in the work of the IVD subgroup that I mentioned. And we also work together with agencies, with the European Medicines Agency, which I mentioned already, and the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. In terms of the work that goes on in the MDCG, there are regular meetings, both of the MDCG itself and of the different subgroups. They're usually run by the Commission and for the subgroups, also with the help of the member state co-chairs. In terms of the work, to actually produce documents, for example, this work is organized in thematic task forces that may consist of a few member states, and they can be chaired either by the Commission or by a representative of a member state. The groups also look at the functioning of different systems that are supposed to be set up under the IVDR. For example, the expert panels, the EUDAMED database, the unique device identification system, and so on. And these groups are also used as a forum for member states to coordinate on various work that they do. For example, market surveillance, vigilance, which is to do with incidents, classification of devices, whether something is actually an IVD or not, and so on. So if we summarize now the roles of the Commission and of the member states in this oversight of how the IVDR is implemented. So the Commission chairs this MDCG group, the member states participate in it. Both the Commission and the member states co-chair the various thematic subgroups and task forces within those. They can both make proposals and comments. And it is the MDCG as a whole, so actually the member state competent authorities that can endorse the guidance documents. The Commission doesn't do this. But in terms of implementing acts, so if there are legal acts needed for some aspects of the implementation, these are voted on by the member states in that regulatory committee, and the Commission then formally adopts them. And the Commission works on establishment of the various EU-level systems. So I mentioned already the EUDAMED database, the UDI, unique device identification, expert panels, EU reference labs, and so on. And as it builds them, it consults the member state competent authorities. And sometimes they also have special roles. For example, for the EU reference labs, they also have a role in assessing the candidates. So moving on now to the third part, in terms of the conformity assessment system for devices. Just as a reminder, the IVDR has put in place this new classification system for devices, so from A to D, from low risk to high risk. And depending on the risk class, the manufacturer has to either declare conformity with the legal requirements or apply to a notified body. Plus, on the right-hand side, you can see there's a special group of in-house devices which are manufactured and used within the same health institution, and they have their own set of requirements, and they don't need to go to a notified body. So here is this simplified schematic of how the conformity assessment system works. So who actually does conformity assessment? Mostly it is the manufacturer who draws up the technical file and creates the quality management system for the device. And then this is assessed by notified bodies. Then when the notified bodies give a certificate to the manufacturer, he can mark the device and put it on the market. So manufacturers and notified bodies routinely do conformity assessment, and the Commission and competent authorities have supervisory roles in that. So, for example, the national authorities and the Commission are involved in the designation of notified bodies. So they do something called joint assessment, the joint between the Commission and the designating authority. National authorities also look at devices that are out there on the market, and they scan for any problems, and they also investigate incidents. So this is the field of vigilance. In some cases, for some special devices, there are also other elements. So here you can see for companion diagnostics, there's also the medicines competent authority involved. So the notified body is supposed to consult it. For some Class D devices, there are also other bodies, expert panels, or reference labs involved. So the Commission and the European Medicines Agency runs the expert panels. As for the URLs, they will run independently, but the Commission will perform controls of them. So to summarize also the roles in the functioning of the conformity assessment system for the Commission and for the competent authorities. As I said, both of them are involved in the designation of notified bodies in the joint assessment of the candidate notified bodies. The European Commission runs some elements of the infrastructure, for example, the EUDAMED database, the UDI help desk. It helps the EMA manage expert panels, and it will do control of the reference labs. And the competent authorities, on the other hand, have some other tasks. For example, if there's disagreement on a classification of a particular device, then the manufacturer notified body can apply for dispute resolution on this. They do vigilance and market surveillance, and they also perform oversight of those in-house devices. And the Commission gives the competent authorities the possibility to coordinate by running meetings of the subgroups and of the MDCG on those topics. So just to finish off, in terms of where we stand with the implementation of the IVDR, here you can see a summary of a lot of work that has been done. So the slide is it has a lot of text on it. So just to walk you through it, in terms of the governance, the MDCG itself was actually created by the new regulations, and it's been in place since 2017. And the subgroups are operational from 2019. In terms of the notified bodies, we've had 18 applications to date, and there are 7 already designated under the IVDR. There have been a number of different implementing and delegated acts adopted. In terms of the scientific structures, the expert panels have already been opened, and they've been operating for a while. They have issued some views on some high-risk IVDs. For the reference labs, the 2 implementing acts on tasks and criteria and on fees have actually been adopted. The slide is slightly out of date. And the draft call is soon to be launched for the member states to submit applications for the candidate URLs. In terms of the EUDAMED database, so far there are 3 out of the 6 planned modules already available for voluntary use. These are the actor registration module, the UDI and device module, and the notified body and certificate module, and others including clinical investigations and performance studies, vigilance and market surveillance will be made available later. The UDI system is in place, and there is also a nomenclature available. In terms of the harmonized standards, these are very important because they give the manufacturers the possibility to ask for presumption of conformity with certain elements of the legislation. So if they comply with the standard, then it means that it's the same as them having complied with those requirements of the IVDR. So there have been already several sets of references, 3 sets of references published in the official journal, and there'll be more coming. For the common specifications, so these are kind of similar to harmonized standards. They also give presumption of conformity with certain elements of the IVDR. They are very important because they give the manufacturers and the notified bodies, the URLs and competent authorities, a kind of common benchmark of what is the level of performance that can be expected for those devices. So we have an act now covering 16 types of high-risk devices for common specifications, and it is also to be adopted very soon. In terms of guidance documents, we have almost 100 guidance documents endorsed. They cover both medical devices and IVDs. And there is also, of course, not to forget international matters. So these are relations with third countries. With Turkey, we have an ongoing customs union. And for Switzerland, unfortunately, medical devices are not covered any longer by a mutual recognition agreement. And a notice to stakeholders was published about that in May last month. So if we have a look here as a kind of summary of what is the status of different elements of the IVDR infrastructure. So you have here again the notified bodies, the consultation for companion diagnostics, expert panels, UDI, nomenclature, UDAMED, and so on. And here I have marked which of those are actually a prerequisite from a legal point of view for devices to actually get on the market. And you can see that those that are absolutely essential are already in place. The difficulty is, of course, around notified bodies and their capacity. So it was clear in 2021 and early 2022 that there would not be sufficient capacity of notified bodies, and the manufacturers were not ready to comply with the IVDR fully from May 2022. And so that's why the Commission proposed an amendment of transitional periods for the IVDR, and this was adopted in January. So here the transition dates for different devices are staggered, with the highest risk devices having to comply earlier and the lowest risk devices having more time, so that this spreads out the workload on the notified bodies. You can see here there also there has been some postponement related to the in-house devices. So there are certain conditions that the health institutions have to fulfill. So for most of them, the date of application has been postponed to 2024. And for the condition where the health institution has to check that there is no CE mark device on the market with equivalent performance, and that has been postponed even later until 2028, so that the market has time to stabilize, and then the health institutions actually can do a meaningful comparison. And so in terms of what we are focusing on now in the MDCG, the notified bodies remain a key topic, and also the readiness of the manufacturers. So the manufacturers need to apply to notified bodies to get those certificates. So the MDCG is involved in monitoring of the market. It's working with manufacturers and with notified bodies to get some numbers on market readiness. There's also some money being made available to support increased capacity of notified bodies. And there's a lot of communication with manufacturers to make sure that they do apply on time to notified bodies. There's a lot of work going on with the UDAMED database to finish at least the minimum viable product part of it. With regard to EU reference laboratories, this is very important for the IVD field. So the implementing acts are done, and the call for application is now being launched. So hopefully the selection will take some months, and hopefully the URLs can be available in 2023. There is work to streamline the functioning of the MDCG. So it has been already working for some years, but there is still room to make their work more streamlined. So that's also one of the priorities. We are also helping member states coordinate more on safety issues, so vigilance and market surveillance of devices. There's also an international group of medical device regulators. This is called the IVDR, International Medical Device Regulators Forum, And in 2023, the EU will hold the chairmanship of this group. So there will also be some projects on the international stage. And finally, it is also important to keep in mind that there is other legislation coming, for example, on artificial intelligence, on revision of pharmaceutical legislation, the European health data space, and so on. So it's important that there is smooth interplay between that and the medical device legislation. So in conclusion, I hope I've explained to you that the European Commission and the member states have quite complementary roles in these three different levels of functioning. So overall, in the EU decision-making, in the setting up of the IVDR, and also in the routine running of the IVDR. And of course, the transition to the IVDR is a challenge for everybody. There are different players, manufacturers, laboratories, competent authorities, and they're all interconnected with each other. And the system is new and maybe still not so familiar to everybody. There are a lot of challenges on the way for complying with the IVDR. But it is by speaking about it like today and by engaging with the IVDR that we can really make it work, and that we can achieve the objectives of the IVDR, which are in the end to make the best devices available to patients in the EU. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion in the Q&A session.
Thank you, Olga, for presenting this overview. It's quite a lot. We will keep the questions for 11 o'clock, so which came in the Q&A. Please, if you have technical problems, put these questions in the chat, then they will be answered also, so that we have a separate real questions and problems, chat and questions and answer. So the next presentation will be given by Anja Wiers. She is senior consultant and has a lot of experience in MDR and IVDR, and also in the previous directive. She has experience with working with the notified bodies. She is also an auditor at the notified body, and she will explain a little bit more about the different organization, notified body, and the role of the European reference laboratories, because Olga was already at touch this, that these will be used. So she will give more information so that your question you have now will be answered. So Anja, please start your presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope you can see it and we can work it. I hope that also the other ones there was some question or some discussion about that I could not see the slides. Maybe that's with the setup of your with the computer itself, but let's hope that we will go through it. Thank you also for inviting me here. It's really a pleasure to discuss here a part of the implementation of the IVDR, and then specific on the role of the different organizations and different roles of the notified bodies and the EU reference lab. What's the status? And I have to say, Olga did a very nice presentation and overview. So I think most of the details are already mentioned. I will just go quickly. Oh, sorry about this. Next one. Oh. Main thing is, of course, that you understand the role of the notified body process and the CE marking process. And this is specific for the manufacturers. So the CE marking notified body involvement is only for manufacturers, for the CE IVDs. For in-house developed tests, the notified bodies are not involved. And then I also explained the role of the EU reference labs, and that's only required for Class D devices and the status of the implementation of that. I always start whatever I present, it's about these two topics. We want to serve, of course, good patient health, and safety and performance is key for every device placed on the market in Europe. That's for CE marking. And of course, safety, you never get 100% safe products. It's always the benefit should outweigh the risks of using these products. And due to, of course, the pandemic, we all now know what is an IVD, what is a self-test, why it is so important to have proper products on the market. Very quickly, And it was also mentioned already by Els that also the MDR was there. And I have to say that the MDR and IVDR, although the focus is on the IVDR, but the MDR is also there still working. And there are now also, and it's interrelated with each other more or less, especially with notified bodies and timelines and availability to focus on getting the certificates out and having good and proper file reviews. The main thing is all other directives are not there anymore. It's the date of application of the MDR was 2021, last year. And of course, we had last month, the date of application of the IVDR. But before you place as a manufacturer the IVDs on the market, you have to comply to this. And how are the regulatory requirements taken care of? In Europe, we use the notified bodies who are designated by the competent authorities and the European Commission to do the approval system in Europe. And that's different from the US, which has an FDA process. Two main things, and there's no difference between the IVD or the IVDR, so the old directive versus the new regulations. You have to have two steps to show that you are in compliance with the regulation. The main thing is you have your technical dossier analysis is number one, and the second one, you have to have a proper functioning quality management system. The technical dossier analysis will be most of the time offsite, especially now. They will always be a very extensive review of your technical dossier, show the state of the art and safety and performance is guaranteed. And the quality management system is an audits. Those are audits every year. You will get audits, on-site CE audits, and notified bodies also are obliged to execute unannounced audits. And if both steps are okay, not one, both steps have to be okay, then you get your CE approval, and then the manufacturer is allowed to place your products on the market and sell it in Europe. And it was really nice to see already the IVDR, the mutual recognition with Switzerland and so on. So it's for manufacturers really a challenge, where do we have to go to and what is allowed and where can we sell it now in Europe. About the regulation, Els also already mentioned this. The regulation, we have 10 chapters and 113 articles. And in those articles, all those requirements are described. And in chapter 4, you see the notified bodies requirements. And chapter 5, the classification and the conformity assessment. Conformity assessment is really the one which is the notified body going to verify what the manufacturers have to comply to. So the chapters are explaining, articles are explaining what you have to comply to, and the annexes are more or less explaining how you have to comply to the regulation. And then you see Annex 1, and that's also for the in-house developed test, of course. Annex 1 is the general safety performance requirements. So the safety and performance is there, and it will be discussed in detail. And then you see for Annex 2, for the manufacturers, technical documentation, what should be in the technical documentation. Annex 3 is technical documentation, post-market surveillance, very important part. And then for the notified bodies, because that's the main focus, is now Annex 7. That's where you can see what are the requirements to be met by the notified bodies. And in Annex 12, you see the certificates issued by the notified bodies. And then the conformity assessment routing, that's where we focus on, will be Annex 9. You will have a full QMS and technical documentations, or you will follow as a manufacturer Annex 10 or 11. So, prior to placing a device on the market or putting it into service, manufacturers shall undertake an assessment of the conformity of that device in accordance with the applicable conformity assessment procedures. So the manufacturers have to choose a conformity assessment, which part, and then the notified body will then verify if that conformity assessment is done properly. And it's required for Class A, sterile B, C, and D. Not for Class A's. The Class A's are self-declared, just like most of the products under the IVDD who were self-declared. So Annex 9 is quality management system and technical documentation. If you choose to have a full conformity assessment for Annex 10 to 11, you have a type examination with a production quality assurance. It depends, and the notified bodies know exactly what the difference is and how to do it. And with type examination, the notified bodies have to do type testing as well. I'm not going to explain the classification rules anymore because everybody knows them. Class D is the highest, C's, B's, and only A's are not going through a notified body anymore. All others are going through a notified body process and have to follow the conformity assessment routing. That means that there's a huge increase of self-declared products currently under the IVDD going into a notified body process. And that's also a big increase in workload of notified bodies who were designated under the IVDD and now going to IVDR, which means a huge amount of new products going to be reviewed with new extra requirements. The conformity assessment routing depends on the classification, and if you have a class B, C, D, or class A sterile, you will get the number of the notified body behind it. And this is a slide from TÜV because this is the number of TÜV. Most of the genetic tests will probably be class Cs. So then if you follow the Annex 9 routing, so you will have the QMS routing on the higher first level, that's all QMS. You have to comply that the product is produced all the time the same way, and design development is controlled with change control. And then you see the technical dossier sampling, that's one level below. You will see that the technical dossier sampling, it's Annex, it's Annex 9. So I'm at class C, then the TD sampling, Annex 9. Notified bodies are allowed to do TD sampling based on calculations, how many technical dossiers there are, how many products there are, if they belong in a family group or not. However, there's no sampling possible for self-testing or near-patient testing and companion diagnostics. All those self-tests, near-patient tests, and companion diagnostic, all those files have to be reviewed separately. And if you follow the Annex 10-11 routing, it's more or less the same. And if you have a companion diagnostic, you have to consult with the EMA and or the Medicinal Agency Board. And that's also in collaborations with your notified body. For the Class Ds, you also follow the same routing. However, the Class Ds are very strict controlled. And you see that the technical dossier assessment, you see that now in the red square, that includes an independent testing, performance evaluation, performance verification by the reference labs, by the EU reference labs. And then you also have a novel IVD consultation, and you have the batch verification. Every batch released of a Class D has to be approved, by the notified body, and the batch verification is also done under the EU reference lab process. So there you see the reference lab process. As said, and I checked it this morning again, it's here you see an overview. It's maybe a bit a difficult slide, but you see Europe there. In purple, you see the notified bodies designated under the IVDD. We had 21 designated under the IVDD, only doing Class A, Bs, and self-testing. Now we have, and it's going now to 19. It was 19, and in the green one, you see the current designated notified bodies for IVDR. And I have to say the biggest ones are there. That's BSI Netherlands, TÜV Zuid, TÜV Rijnland, DEKRA, GMAT. They are the biggest IVDRs, and I don't think that 3EC, I'm not sure if they are allowed to do the genetic testing. On top, you see the overview of the European Commission of the notified bodies at the stage of designation process. And in yellow, you see the designations of the notified bodies of the IVDR. And all got mentioned already, we have 18 applications. That's completely at the left-hand side on the top part. But overall, if you look at the Joint Assessment Team CAPA review, if you go halfway through, there you see that there's 9. So currently you have 7 designated, and I think there are 2 in the process. Overall, this whole process, from first application to the end, I think together with the MDR, it takes about 600 to 700 days to get a designation. So it's not going that easy. And I think it's also good to understand that estimate is now, we discussed it last month at the REPS EU convergence, that there are around 250 to 300 IVDR certificates issued currently. And that's after 5 years of having the IVDR into force. What is the biggest issue for the manufacturers and related to the notified body process is really the application process takes a lot of time, and it's good to apply as a manufacturer, but the notified bodies also, they are completely full already or are full. You can start, but the process takes a long time. So yes, it's good that the manufacturers are forced to say, okay, we have to apply, but as the notified bodies are very busy, sometimes they say, well, we just wait a bit. The technical dossier, an example of a dossier, for instance, for a class C, which is about more of, and that's a class C, so not a D, 500 pages, has to be reviewed, and an initial completeness check is about 2 to 3 months after if you get your application and you have your contract with your notified body. And the overall estimated timelines for file reviews is 12 to 18 months. So take that into account. And I have now an example which is now already delayed for 1.5 years. But it's good to realize that those file reviews are really extensive. The QMS audits, there was for IVDR, it is required as an initial to have them on site. And there was a big issue, of course, due to COVID. The auditors could not travel. And remote auditing in some countries were not allowed at all, for instance, in Germany. So that's also a delay, can cause a delay in your certificate because you need to have both technical files and your QMS. And it depends on your competent authority. Okay, now quickly back to, that's notified bodies. It's a challenge. They're working all hard together to get the process up and running, but it's also different from MDR. The IVDR is new. There's a lot of new products, especially the genetic tests. They have to get used to how do we accept and analyze the performance data, the clinical performance trials, what is allowed, what's enough, or is it a novel product? But now we go back to the timelines, and here you see we are now already in the date of application of the IVDR, and you see that the reference labs are also mentioned here, specific for the class Ds. This is also for the TÜV Süd. What are the requirements of the EU reference lab? That's listed in Article 100. Main thing is to have an independent performance verification and independent lab, EU reference lab, to verify the performance verifications and to show the compliance with common specifications. If there are common specifications. There are not currently common specifications, but it helps if there are common specifications, and the reference labs test those devices with those common specifications. They also do the sample and batch testing. They advise the European Commission, ESHG, member states, and the notified bodies. They will set up a network of national reference laboratories to have a common playing field throughout whole Europe. Recommendation of suitable reference materials and a subnetwork of EU reference laboratories is also required to be set up. The criteria to become an EU reference lab is very strict. Some people think it's not easy, but have a good look. What is required? It's really strictly to have an independence and impartiality requirements. That's very strict controlled by Europe. And of course, they have to build their EU reference lab. And we were waiting for the implementing acts, but Olga already mentioned it. And I will show it now. I saw it yesterday. It has been published. The 2 implementing acts. But overall, the setup of the EU reference lab, which is specific and very strict required for the class Ds, the highest risks, it has been delayed, and it's expected to have the first EU reference lab assigned. Well, I heard Olga mentioning, well, let's hope for 2023. One of those reference labs who will apply expected that it takes 1.5 years, something like this. So it will be Q1 2024, something that's what they expect. But it always happens on the last day before we have a presentation. Yesterday it was published, and we're pleased that it's there now. The 2 implementing acts for the reference labs, what are the requirements to comply to and how to get the reference lab, especially the 2022-944. There are laying down the rules, what is required, and we were waiting for these implementing acts, but we have them now. The 945 is more about the fees. If you have time, you can have a good look at it, and especially if you are considering to become a national reference lab, it's interesting. Of course, then for Article 100 and the EU reference labs, who will get designated, who will get the assignment? In the conferences, I always see 2 EU reference labs who will apply. Probably it's the Paul Ehrlich Institute from Germany and Sensano from Belgium. We do not know if there are more. we'll see how it goes, but of course we need more. The requirement is in 70.025. That's not an issue. You have to set up your network and in national reference laboratories, a sub-network of EU reference lab. And the main thing is they want that you need to be, as an EU reference lab, independent, financially independent, legally independent, and make a level playing field that all reference lab and subgroups are working together and having the same testing, the same way that all those Class Ds will be verified in the same way. So the harmonization and consistency is really a key. However, when will it be ready? Because the Class Ds, due to the the soft transition requirements for legacy devices, not new devices, but the legacy devices, the soft transition, the CE research need to be there 26th of May 2025, because that's Class D. And also COVID tests are Class Ds. And if you see that a regular review time for a notified body is now 12 to 18 months, the reference labs are not set up, how do they get the CE certs? Then probably the notified bodies have to rely on a different process, because maybe this process, the EU reference lab is not, the process is not functioning yet. So then you have to go to the PECP process. Oh, this is an example from Mika Neubling from the Pearl English Institute. He's just saying, okay, it's not only a reference lab, you can become a reference lab for all Class Ds. No, of course, you have to apply for very specific parts where your lab is really showing all the knowledge and evidence for. So for instance, you see here in yellow, you see a reference lab specific for the HIV testing, or you see an orange one for the CMV and the EBV tests, and so on. And you see, for instance, the SARS-MERS influenza for a pandemic. Maybe we have different EU reference labs and networking, but they have to all collaborate and combine that overall the EU reference labs and the sub-networks and the national groups have the same principle and testing and outcome. Then the PECPs, the very quick one, because it's the performance evaluation consultation procedure. So when there is no EU reference lab, then this is the way forward also for novel devices. So this is what we call the PECPs. And that's for Class Ds. And I have an old list of the products which have been part of the PECP process already for the Class D, because the EU reference lab were not there. Currently 15 have been done now. It's good to look at it and see, okay, what's the requirement? But based on this, on the PECP, the notified bodies will respond and will go forward with the process to certify the Class Ds, yes or no. And especially with those timelines, it's preferable to have the EU reference labs process working and up and running, because that's very strict and very controlled, then that you have to rely on the PECP process. But then the timeline of getting the CE certificates in time is really an issue. Because yeah, we see here, of course, the timelines and objectives. It's now June 2022. And you see here, and we are all really pleased for those extension of the soft transition. However, IVDR is currently there. It's applicable for new devices. You have to go into the whole conformity assessment routine with your notified body already all the time. And I think this is the main thing. Keep on smiling, but it's good to also understand, I think, for the team, how is the work at how is the EU reference lab going to be implemented, and how is the work at the notified body? And it's a challenge, and the notified bodies, they have to have a lot of knowledge. The qualifications and those requirements are very strict. But if you have more questions, please feel free to contact me and question. And I will stop share and we'll go back to you, Els.
No, thank you. We come to the question and answer session. Olga, I know you're also online. Perhaps you can put your camera on if available. Anja, you can keep your camera on, because it would be nice if you can also be in the question. Oh, no, I forgot. Sorry, I was completely wrong. It's because of the timing. No, we have a last speaker.
Bad news,
Elizabeth. No, Elizabeth is the chair or the co-chair, together with some other colleagues, of the task force working group of Biomed Alliance, and she will explain what we are doing in this task force group and why it is important for us, and so that you are not feeling you're alone as a genetic lab. That's the main issue. Go on, Elizabeth, sorry.
That's all right. Thank you, Els. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we see everything and we hear you, but we see only the slides in two, not in a slide preview. We see the small one also.
Ah, so how do I get it onto, oh dear.
I think you have to, there is usually a button that says switch views. I don't see it here. Could you go in paramètres d'affichage on top and look what it says there? Basculer le mode, exactly.
Is that it?
Thank you. Absolutely, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Els, and thank you for inviting me. I'm Elizabeth McIntyre. I'm a diagnostic hematologist, an MD, and I'm IVDR task force at the Biomedical Alliance in Europe, and I'm president-elect. And I mention that because I think it's important in this context to realize that all these surgeons and internists and psychiatrists and what have yous were prepared to accept having a diagnostic doctor as their president-elect, which I think reflects the recognition of the importance of diagnostic medicine. I'm also, but that's irrelevant for today, I'm also president of the European Hematology Association. Now, else at Biomed Alliance, you can see the 36 medical societies that we represent here on the left. And we've been in existence for 10 years. We're not a syndicate. We're there to defend the value chain for from basic research to patient benefit and back again. And we're increasingly involved in being a one-stop shop to communicate with the European Commission, because it is exceedingly difficult for the Commission to reach out to the innumerable number of medical societies. And that's one of our strengths at the Biomed Alliance. So I've got a few minutes to try and address the role of stakeholders in the IVDR process. And I'm not going to talk about what we do at Biomed Alliance. We don't have time. We do lots of different things, but we do have a regulatory affairs committee, which first was active in the medical device field, is now highly active in the IVD field, and is gearing up for even more activity in the European health data space, because all of these activities are very interlinked. Now, when we started, we were invited to become an independent observer in the Medical Device Coordination Group in 2019. And this was pretty much the landscape when we joined. The laws had been taken. IVDR was at that point within GROW, but subsequently moved to DG Santé. And there were two bodies that were invited to become observers. There was EFLM, the European Federation of Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine, and Biomed Alliance. We realized that we needed to make sure we had a maximum number of the relevant diagnostic specialties. So when we created the Biomed Alliance IVDR task force in the second half of 2019, we ended up with 14 member societies who wanted to join this activity, including EFLM. So EFLM sort of gets a double voice. They get invited as an independent stakeholder, and Biomed Alliance does, but we work closely together because there's so much overlap. But you can see in this map that described the picture a year or two ago that we were very much observers, and one of the bottom lines is that we like to see ourselves as constructive actors rather than as observers, and I hope Olga agrees with me. And when we saw what the substantial changes between IVD and IVDD and IVDR were, we sort of decided to divide the workload between us, with EFLM taking the lead on the CE marked part of the diagnostic activity, and EHA and ESHG tending to be more involved in the in-house laboratory developed tests. Now, I will call them in-house devices from now on, but it's synonymous with laboratory developed tests, which is the term that tends to be used in North America. Now, I don't need to tell this audience that as assays get more complex and more rare, they're less interesting for the commercial sector. And the percentage of in-house testing that is done in different disciplines is highly variable, but where we all share the same questions, because these tests involve cellular tests, protein tests, and molecular tests. But we were worried about loss of CE-IVDs from lack of preparedness, but we're also worried about fragility in the translational diagnostic value chain and difficulties in maintaining innovative diagnostics given the increasing complexity for regulatory compliance. And also we're worried about the risk of monopolies because of the famous Article 5.5D that does not allow us to continue using in-house diagnostics unless we can show that there is not an equivalent CE-IVD test on the market. So we got our act together and we learned how to communicate with the myriad of different commissions and bodies in the European Commission, thanks to the help of our policy officers who are totally indispensable in this process. We got a STOA workshop in April of last year on IVDR and its consequences. We launched a questionnaire last summer, which I will show you the conclusions of in a minute. We communicated with the Commission, and because a lot of this is a question of getting to know each other and building bilateral confidence, because these are not armies of people who have total absolute knowledge of everything. They're hardworking people at both Commission and member state level who need our support rather than our expectations of perfection and criticism when it doesn't happen to fall into our laps straight away. So we welcome the tendency to move towards amending transitional provisions, because that was a very serious worry at the beginning of the last academic year. And during the discussions, I think we've learned to understand each other better and better. And certainly one concept that the IVDR dictates what we must do, but it's up to us as diagnostic specialists to define and accompany how we do it, which comes back to the concept of cooperation rather than confrontation. And we promoted the IVDR questionnaire, and all of this culminated in the new timelines, which was a great advance. So very briefly, we sent out a questionnaire which was not exhaustive. We did what we could, and we got replies from 203 laboratories last summer before the timelines had been pushed back. And this represented 25 of the 27 EU member states. If you're interested in the detail, they are published online in open access in Hemisphere, the EHA journal. And here you can see the 51 responses we got from ESHG. You can see on the responses per country were not proportional to the population of the country or the number of laboratories, and probably more represent the existence of federative bodies where diagnostic specialists have some forum where they communicate among specialties. Because one of our problems in the innovative diagnostic world is we tend to be so specialized that we don't really speak with one voice within our countries. This is the bottom line of the, on average, for predominantly academic EU laboratories. You can see here in purple, this is the CE-IVD kits. In red is the in-house IVD, and the colors in between are the gray area of RUO, research use only, and off-label use of CE-IVD kits. So although we know that the vast majority of tests that patients get results from are CE-IVD, when you look at the gamut of choice of tests, approximately 50% are not CE-IVD. And once again, you'll find the details in this publication from Isabelle Dombrink and others. What our community wants is guidance, workshops, support, postponement, which we achieved, and clarity on the way this is all going to work. But it's mainly confusion about what it all really means, fears that are sometimes justified and sometimes not justified, a lot of lack of clarity of how much this is different or overlapping with ISO 15189 accreditation. Bear in mind that IVDR is not the same as the accrediting bodies. And one thing I just wanted to highlight was you can see that Olga, who you heard talk first this morning, was a signatory of this document. Now, this is an important point because the European Commission cannot associate itself with all sorts of published commentaries. So I think the fact that Olga's name is on this document is objective proof of the fact that we have learned and are continuing to learn to work efficiently together, and it's been a very pleasant process. So, and the description of the environment that is in this publication without the red boxes is what you see here. And now we as stakeholders, we're here alongside the EUR reference laboratories and the ExpaMed panels, which are there for the Class D devices, because we have to deal with this huge range, including the mainly Class C genetic testings in constitutional and in acquired cancer genetics, a lot of which happens within what we call hematology laboratories, depending on the different countries. So we're now on the map as stakeholders, but also I think hopefully as constructive contributors. Before leaving this slide, none of us know how this is going to actually evolve, what the long-term benefits and consequences will be. But at a personal level, one thing I retain is in the attempt to make sure that the tests that are on the market are optimal for patients, whether they be in-house testing or CE-IVD, one principle to retain is you should be doing something frequently. If you do a test twice a year, you're unlikely to be doing it with optimal competence. And I think there will be a move towards ERN-like rare diagnostic networks. And I am not talking here about these highly controlled, very specific EURLs that are there to oversee the manufacturing sector. I'm talking about the fact that we need to compare notes when we're doing rare diagnostics, and Europe is a space where we could help each other rather than just creating a confusing landscape. I'm almost finished, but these are the current next steps and challenges as I see them. We need guidance workshops at national and European levels. The solutions for this are going to be different for CE-IVD because industry is going to help us to do it. But we within the academic sector need to provide concerted, useful, appropriate support for the in-house innovative sector. We need to help national competent authorities to communicate with multidisciplinary academic diagnostic specialist federative bodies, because both sides have difficulty finding each other and none of them can talk independently to all of our increasingly specialized and increasingly numerous subspecialties. So within each country, I encourage you to set up some kind of regulatory, some kind of collective body that means that the geneticists, the pathologists, the hematologists, the immunologists can speak with one voice, because what we're talking about here is not specific to either you as geneticists or the pathologists or the infectious diseases people. Now, some countries have such organizations. I've just cited Germany because I know of its existence, but Germany has the complexity of a federal system. I don't know if in France the network of laboratoires de référence will fulfill this role, but I think it's worth considering. I think we need to clarify differences between IVDR and ISO 15189, and we need to clearly defend the importance of innovative diagnostics at member state level, because if we hear different things at member state level from what we say at the European level, then nothing much will happen. We need to communicate with the biotech bodies, nationally and internationally, MedTech Europe at the European level. We need to work with the European Commission and with DG Santé and the European Medicines Agency to integrate national and European synergic initiatives. We must involve patients because that's who politicians listen to, and they need to understand the importance of defending innovative diagnostics. We need to understand the place of companion diagnostics because the therapeutic, the pharma industry uses in-house testing, and we all need to understand how this is going to evolve with personalized precision medicine. We need to minimize the risk of regulatory exhaustion and the explosion of diagnostic costs that I think are to a certain extent inevitable. And finally, we need to train an appropriate cohort, it can be small, of medical regulatory scientists. And I emphasize that this is not the same as regulatory officers. I am not a regulatory officer. I am not the person who knows all the details of ISO 15189, but we do need people who can maintain the bigger picture and who can defend pragmatism and avoiding a bureaucratic, excessively complicated system that nobody can apply and that, in the desire to be perfect, ceases to be in the patient's interests. So to conclude, IVDR compliance will be a major effort for diagnostic laboratories. It will require time and budget. We need guidance, but that will be provided differently for the CE tests and for in-house testing. The prolongation is very welcome, and I think we should all remember that the march towards personalized and precision diagnostics, which is allied to the big data revolution, will require or encourage some centralization, specialization. It aims to contribute to optimized patient safety and care. It also aims to create a vibrant, competitive European health industry, and we are actors in that evolution. And on that note, I would just like to thank all the different societies that work within the Biomedical Alliance. We couldn't have done it alone, and it's much more efficient and pleasant to do it together. And I'll stop there and take questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We will start with the questions now. So Gert is here. So.
Good morning, everybody. Thank all the speakers already. We have a magnificent set of information or set of presentations with loads of information. I have collected a little bit of the questions, and of course, I think most of the questions could be answered by any of you, but I'll try and just point some. One of the first ones, which has been put twice, is what is the guidance or what is the approach that will be used for this direct-to-consumer testing? It may be a bit on the side of what genetic laboratories are doing, but it's certainly at a societal level a concern. So maybe, Olga, I think you're closest to this overview on what is included. So would you please explain a bit about the situation of the in-house testing, the direct-to-consumer testing, so anything but the in-house testing?
Actually, I'm not so familiar with the context, with the concept of direct-to-consumer testing. So can we just, for me to understand, are these tests that are still made in the health institutions, or?
No, it's vice versa. These are the tests that are typically offered through internet with laboratories that are certainly private and mostly based in the US or other countries. I know in Germany these tests are not allowed, but in the other countries they are. I see both Anja and Elizabeth nodding. Would any one of you maybe follow up on the situation, Elizabeth?
I didn't know what DCT was either, Olga, so you're in good company. But I think, to say it quickly, it's something like 23andMe.
Exactly. So, Anja,
yeah, 23andMe, we don't want that. That's not what I think with thinking about the data protection regulation, it's different. But that I think it's really getting specimen receptacles, sample kits sent to you, and then you will get your sample in, and then it will be tested in a lab, and you will get the results via internet. That's how it goes. Officially now, those sample kits, the collection kits are Class A under Rule 5. So you have to go through the notification, and then the tests itself is of course now a Class B, C, D, depends on what it's going to check, and you have to go through a notified body to get the approval. When it's really specific and health professional providing the data in the lab and sending it back to you. So that's a critical part of having those direct to consumer testing. It's not a self-test, because a self-test is just like the COVID test. It's come here and you see the results. It's a direct to consumer test, but there has to be a clear involvement of a health professional getting the results out. And that's, I think, and then also be careful with, indeed, if the lab is in the US, it has to comply to the IVDR. So they have to get the audits, they have to get the approvals and the CE certificates.
Yeah, I think so. From the regulatory side, it seems to be in order and they apply. And I think then maybe we shall say it's more of a societal and a medical problem in the different countries. So we put that aside for other activities within the European Society of Human Genetics. They have already commented on this. The second question,
I think, if I may, Gert, I think it's not only the specimen receptacles, because we have this Article 6.
But that's for the
regulation about the distance sales. So in fact, it's also the actual test that is going to have to be regulated.
But that's what I mean, yeah. So it's not the self-test indeed. The second question, I think maybe Anja, what are the costs for the manufacturer for a test when it's not checked by a notified body? And maybe what is the overall cost of going for CE marking, even of your own testing?
Yeah, it's and as a notified, when I was working at the notified body, it's always, it depends. Every product is different. Every product needs more time and more or less. And especially with the genetic tests, that's what I see now. They are not, at the notified bodies, they are not used to have those genetic tests, especially the rare diseases. I really fully agree with you, Elizabeth. This is really a challenge, and it's not exempt, rare diseases. But then it needs more time. So every time when you are going from manufacturer to a notified body, you will get in your company information form, you say what type of device it is, and then you will get a quotation. And the more complex the test is, the more high risk the test is, the higher the price it is. Overall, the prices should be published, will be published for the notified bodies, the costs. But it all depends if it's a big family group or not. So it depends on how it is. If it's really a standard one, yeah, think about 10, 20, 30,000 euros. And then you have your annual audits, of course. Then you have your unannounced audits, and you have every year the file reviews again, depending on the classifications. But it can also be with a high risk more, much more. It all depends on, you will get a quotation. So I can't say this is it. This will be the final one. And I don't even know how exactly it is, but take that into account. But the most work, the most complex work and the most costs are by you, by the manufacturer themselves, to get fully in compliance. Because if you have it all in compliance and have every files, because they need so many files and so many reports and so many plans, then the review will be more and will be better. So it's better to have it completely nice and properly done and with all the requirements, and that takes much more time and much more money than having the final file review, because the notified bodies only do the file review at the end, and they come back and say it's not okay. And the biggest costs are when you have the hours for when the CAPAs or have to be, or you have to solve it. So sorry for that. It's no one way.
No, but I think the order of magnitude is what you're giving. So in the field of genetics, given that the numbers of tests for each indication are rather small, I think there will be limited situations when laboratories will go for CE accreditation, unless there is a good reason, for instance, to say our system is better, or we do not want by any means buy the CE kit. Then again, you have to go through the entire procedure. But let's say in genetics, it will not be that often the case.
But I have manufacturers who have really specific rare genetic test diseases, and you will see that there's now a discussion: what is enough performance, yes or no, and how what is accepted, and will it be novel?
But it's the other way around, I think. Maybe else that's also what has been pointed out before. It's many companies that will not go for CA accreditation of kits that are on the market now, and this will then also the burden of be compliant will then be with the laboratories that have to have at least the Article 5 and the in-house requirements in place. I think this is a major, not a threat, but a major complication and a major job to be held on the side of the laboratories. The next question I think is good. What in terms of content? How will the national accreditation bodies, which is assess the requirements? I'm not sure if in the discussion the questions are really specific for the competent authorities versus the accreditation, the accreditation bodies. Yes. So, but this question can maybe come back later when we will discuss about the link about 15189 and
no, IVDR. But I think we can discuss it shortly here because we have the different stakeholders.
Yeah.
So it's depending what is written in your national law, because you have the European regulation, and in the national law it is mentioned who will be the competent authority and with who the competent authority will work together, if they will work together with other organizations. So it's from country to country possible different. But normally the accreditation bodies for 15189 or for 17025 is a different organization than the competent authority. So you will go for accreditation 15189. It's your national recognized accreditation body, because there is also a European law for this, and the competent authority is some other organization, but it can have agreements with the national accreditation body.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, we heard already from some countries that if you're accredited for the test, which is not necessary under the IVDR regulation, but if you're accredited, that the competent authority will not look to the same documents. So, but it's really related to your law in your country.
I think you will come back on this in your afternoon lecture, Els, right?
Yes, we can have a whole week training, so it's all short presentations so that everyone can find further and can decide what training we will give further. So.
Yeah, I think then another question maybe again for Olga. There is, I think, the distinction between the laboratory test and the bioinformatics are both then type Cs. This is the question that comes in. The question was put a bit complicated. That's why I'm having hard times in translating it to you. But I think this is the issue. Where shall we draw the line between the wet work and the bioinformatics? Are the same evaluated according to the same guidelines? I guess so. But how to conceptually deal with that in the laboratory?
Yeah, I think it depends really how do you define a device, and it's all about the intended purpose. So if you have a pipeline that has a certain function, for example, diagnosing cancer or staging cancer, then just the wet lab part by itself is not enough to give you the result, and neither is the platform, the bioinformatics. You really need both, so they really form one device for the purposes of classification. And then you read the Annex 8, the different rules, and you see where this whole pipeline would fit in according to its intended purpose, and that's how you would do the classification.
And is there a difference between software that is merely used in the lab, as you point out, as part of diagnostic test, and software that is also used by the end user, actually the medical doctor in the hospital, and would then extend from the laboratory to the doctor? I mean, this is a different user than the person in the laboratory that writes a clinical report, actually.
Yes, but still, again, you have to go back to the intended purpose of the whole thing.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter who's the user, but if the intended purpose is this, for example, staging cancer, the rules are quite general. They're really like this. The device is used in diagnosing staging cancer. It's a class C. So that's how you achieve your classification. The user then is not so important. It can be important in the case of self-tests, because there's a specific reference. If it's a lay user doing it, then it's always a class C. It cannot be below class C. But for the example that you gave, I think that's there the user doesn't matter, and it's actually relatively clear.
I pick out one question, I think, for Elizabeth. I think all the proposals you've made to work together and so on are very, very well applauded and very well accepted. What would you specifically do to bring scientists together at the European level? Is there really, what would be the real ways we can collaborate? Are we allowed to just divide the works amongst laboratories and say, you try and have a dossier for Fragile X and you try to have the dossier for Huntington's, and UPS will all subscribe to these?
It's a vast subject and we're already over time.
Well, we have time, don't worry, go ahead.
Okay, so co-working requires confidence, and confidence requires knowing each other. You can't have confidence in somebody you don't know and you can't talk to. So anything that builds putting us together will help. But at all these European meetings, we're preaching to the converted, and there's a huge Darwinian selection for the people who like the European level. And some of them are just excited by Europe, and some of them find anyway, I won't go into the other interpretations. So what I really think we should try and do is within our countries have some kind of body where the different specialties talk to each other, as I said, and then we can somehow form some kind of network whereby each of the people in these national federative bodies communicate at the European level. And we need to ask the Commission to put out a call to help us do that, because it's not going to happen because we like each other. And that can, it might tie in with one other question, which is, should we train regulatory scientists at the EU level? And I think the answer is yes. And I think we should probably train regulatory scientists in diagnostics, in the regulatory science of diagnostics, in a transdisciplinary fashion, because I don't think we in hematology at the European Hematology Association are going to need to train enough people that we do it without doing it with the constitutional geneticists and the oncologists. And I think we will all, if we want to help Europe to continue and to avoid the nationalist tendencies, then it makes huge sense to set up European training. Because for somebody who, I hate excessive regulation. I think it stifles science, it stops innovation. Anyway, I won't go on about that otherwise. But I've come to realize as a Euro actor that without regulatory agreements, we can't keep Europe on track. So we have to find a good way of doing it pragmatically while maintaining innovation. And I think there's a lot of scope if we can come up with understanding the same rules. That will help to keep Europe on track. So sorry, that's slightly long answer.
That's fine. And I think your dual answer to the question is the most, I would say, pragmatic one. We need to make sure at the national level that people talk to each other. And I can testify that in Belgium, we've indeed brought together all the lab specialists from the different disciplines, and this has been very effective. So I suggest that other countries do it the way you do it. You said, and then of course bring those people together at the European level.
But it is easier in smaller countries, to be realistic.
For sure. And then at the beginning, you really know our fellow geneticists, and that we don't have many believers at this moment in this whole endeavor. And I think together with European Society and Eurogentist, we want to convert some of them for the most pragmatic approach. I think we round up here, Els.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
We will have a view from the pool so that you know who is following the course. And
Okay.
then we suggest to have a break, but Olga and Anja will have the last words. We have a lunch break till 1 o'clock and then we start again. So perhaps Anja, you had a small question.
Yeah,
an additional answer, yes.
Yeah, well, I had some small remarks. ISO, I'm for instance, I'm an ISO 13485 auditor. I'm not a 15189 auditor, but the ISO is under the accreditation bodies reviewing the accreditation and under the control of the accreditation body. But an ISO 13485 audit, for instance, and for instance at the Netherlands with the Raad van Accreditatie, is different from CE, from product audits and product reviews. Products and the CE is under control of the competent authority. And that's IGJ in the Netherlands. So the accreditation body and the competent authorities are something different. And also, therefore, it's difficult to compare the 15189 accreditation compared to the requirements what the competent authorities want to see under Article 5.5. And I think that's the challenge.
This afternoon on this.
Yeah, perfect.
So, sure.
Thank you so much. But I do it completely different audits if I have ISO only or the combination, for instance. Thank you so much.
Olga?
Yes, I just wanted to come back to the topic of reference labs and panels because there still seems to be some confusion around that. So just to say, there are actually two different sets of bodies. And the key point is that the reference labs, it is not mandatory to have them around for the notified bodies to actually issue the certificate. So for the moment, the reference labs are in the process of being set up, but that is not a barrier for notified bodies to issue the certificate. For the expert panels, it's different. They actually are required for notified bodies to be able to issue certificates, but they're already in place and they're working. So that's fine. And in terms of their functions, they're also not identical. So for the URLs, it is the most Class D devices that will go through them because that's what we envisage with the Commission, with the member states, that really they provide this extra level of independent testing of CE mark devices. So it is really most Class D devices that will be tested by them. But the expert panels, they are very special. So it is really only for new innovative devices, Class D. So only a small subset of Class D that will go to the expert panels. So just to clarify, they are not equivalent and they're not really to substitute for each other. They are complementary. And they really have different functions. And maybe something of interest for the Class C, which is for the genetics is very relevant. It is actually possible in principle to have reference labs verifying the performance of CE marked Class C devices in the future. This is provided for in the IVDR. But as a first priority, we're really focusing on Class D. So this is not going to come probably, at least not in the next, I don't know, years for Class C devices. So yeah, just to clarify a bit more what these different bodies do.
Okay, Oscar, shall we use, thank you, Olga. Oscar, can you show the pool results?